Hello and welcome to this video tutorial on using the useState hook in React. So to get here, all I did was run npx create react app in the terminal. This created the basic outline of an app for me, and I deleted all the unnecessary parts that it produces, and I'm left with just this app. So I did create another component, component.js. I will be using this later in the tutorial, but I'm not using it for now, so I'll close that. My app is completely self-contained within this app.js file. So I'm going to start using the useState hook in my app, but first what I need to do is import it from the React library. So its name in there is useState, and that is from React. Okay, so that's being imported now. I can now start using the useState hook in this component. So the way you go about doing this is you use array destructuring. Now, if you're not familiar with this, don't worry, you can still follow along. What you need to know is that the first item in the array is the name of the variable that you are effectively creating that we call state. So I'm going to give this the name state. You can call it anything you want, but I just want to keep it simple in this example. And the second item is the name of the function that you are going to use to update the value of state. So because it is a special type of variable, you have to update it using this special function updater, and then you call useState, and what you pass in here is the initial value of state. So I'm going to set its initial value to 0. Now if I dynamically insert the value of state down here into what's being rendered to the DOM, so I want to render state, you'll see that in my app the current value of state is 0. Now let's see what happens when I try to update the value of state in this way. So I'm going to set the value of state to state plus 1. So its value is initially 0 plus 1, so it should be 1 in my app. But what you will see here, if I open the console log, is that this is causing an infinite re-render. Now the reason this occurs is because every time you update the value of state, it causes a component re-render, and this is going to lead to setState being called again, leading to another re-render, and so on. So it causes an infinite loop. So a way you can avoid this is to nest the setState updater inside function scope, and then only call that function not every time the component updates. So I'm going to create a button down here, and when it is clicked, I'm going to run the update function. So you only pass a reference to the function into onClick, you don't call the function itself. So now if I take a look at my app, hopefully this is working. I'll just add some text to the button, and we won't be having an infinite loop now. So if I click update state, you can see now that everything's working, and React updates intelligently. So every time, and React updates intelligently, so every time a bit of state is updated, it triggers a re-render, and that re-render only updates those parts of the DOM that need updating where the bit of state has changed. It won't update the entire DOM. Now currently here I'm updating the state by passing in state plus 1, but this isn't actually the best practice way to update state. The best practice way is to pass in a function, and I can show you why this is the case if I try to update state twice inside this update function. So you would think that it would update by 2, but it only updates by 1, and the reason is that each time state refers to the current value of state up here before the re-render that updates the state. So effectively it's 0 plus 1, 0 plus 1. So you can get caught out updating state in this way. The best practice way to update state is to actually pass in a function, and in that function you have available to you something that we didn't have before, which is the value of previous state. Now if we say previous state plus 1, and I'll make that the return value, and I do that twice, you'll see that this will now increase the value of state by 2. Okay, so that's why it's better to use the function and make a return value than input the value directly. So now that I've shown you that, I'll delete this second set state. Now at the moment the initial value of state is 0. It could be another primitive value. It can also be an array or an object. What you can also do is set it using a function. So if you wanted to do something more complex here, you could pass in a function to useState, and then the return value will be the value of the state, the initial value. So here you see that the initial value is still 0 because I'm returning 0 from this function. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the initial value of state to an object, and this will have two properties. I'll say earnings starting at 0, that's going to be in dollars, and then I'll have earnings in euros as well, that is also starting at 0. Now what I want to display in the DOM is current earnings, so I'll change the title to current earnings, and to access earnings in the state object now I use dot notation, and below that I'm going to display earnings in euros, and that is going to be state.earnings euros. So what I want to do in this app now is every time the user clicks on the button, I want the earnings to increase by 1, and then I want the earnings in euros to also update, so it's displayed in euros as well. So what we have to do in the update function now is make quite a bit of a change here, because we're now returning an object, and initially what we want to do is return exactly the same object. So I'm going to spread the contents of previous state into a new object, and now I'm going to update the values of earnings and earnings in euros in this object that I'm returning. So I want to update the value of earnings to previous state dot earnings plus 1. So that one's pretty simple. Earnings in euros, I want to update that to whatever this is. So I'll wrap that in some parentheses. I'm going to want to times that by the exchange rate, which I think is around 0.9 at the moment. And then I'm also going to apply 2 fixed to this. So it's only 2 decimal points, so it doesn't get too long. Okay, so now what I'm doing is I'm updating the state, which is an object, and I'm updating both property values within that using the value of previous state. So let's see what this looks like in the browser now. So these two values, they should be different when I'm clicking update state. One is showing me my current earnings, that would be in dollars, and earnings in euros is updating below. Now one last thing I want to show you is that when you update the value of state, it doesn't just update in your component, it updates throughout the entire app if you are using that state value in other components. So before this video, I created this simple component.js file, and what I'm going to do is to pass down the value of state from this component, the parent component, to this component.js child component and display it where this question mark is here. So to do that, I need to link the two files. I'll import component into my app. Now in terms of what I'm rendering to the DOM, here in my app, I'm going to render component as well, which I can do now I've imported it, and I want to pass down the value of earnings. So that is going to be state.earnings. Now in component.js, what I have available to me is that as a prop. So I'm going to insert the value of prop dot, and we called it earnings there. So that should now be updating not only in app.js but also in component.js. So now if I click update state, you see that updating state is updating the value of earnings throughout my entire app. So this is really efficient because I'm not having to keep track of every instance where state is being used throughout my app. React has taken care of that for me, updating all the instances. So that is it for this tutorial on the useEffect hook and how to use it. If you found it useful, please consider hitting the like button down below this video, and if you'd like to see more content like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel.